The Gwart Show is sponsored by Ellipsis Labs. Ellipsis Labs is building a world where mainstream finance happens on-chain. Their first product, Phoenix, is a fully on-chain limit order book DEX on Solana doing hundreds of millions of dollars in volume. I know this team personally. It's one of the strongest in the space. If you're interested in working with a team that's here to stay, Ellipsis Labs is hiring engineers passionate about DeFi to join their team. You can find Ellipsis Labs on Twitter at ellipsis_labs or head to ellipsislabs.xyz to learn more and apply.
Hey guys, we're here today with Rob Hamilton, who is a true Bitcoin builder, is actually building on Bitcoin in its current form. Somebody that I have listened to, largely respected his opinion, I think is deep in the ecosystem. Welcome, Rob. If you want to introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Thanks, Gwart. Thanks for having me on. I think you did a good breakdown. Very briefly, I got into Bitcoin in 2013, funny enough, because my buddies were mining Dogecoin. I had some buddies that were telling me to check out Bitcoin because they knew I was like a Ron Paul libertarian and the Fed guy. And I was like, okay, whatever, technical stuff. I just like low trust. And then all of a sudden I had my graphics card making Dogecoins and I thought it was peak comedy. And I started going to like, okay, like how does this actually all work? This is like the end of 2013. I start going to New York City BitDevs. I looked through my old emails from meetup.com. I went to BitDevs 8. So I went to New York City BitDevs 8. They just had their 200th BitDevs, right? And I walk into a room and it's like 25 like gray beards and I am the dumbest person in the room. I was like, what are they talking about? Like, this is way over my head. And that was a really humbling experience to make me want to learn more, right? So over time, was just learning about Bitcoin regularly, getting more on the technical side. It's kind of what inspired me to learn how to program. And I spent a lot of time just understanding how cryptography works, how like Bitcoin as a whole system works, and just always kind of digging deeper down the rabbit hole. And in March of 2022, I started my company AnchorWatch, which is offering insured Bitcoin custody. And we can talk a little bit mechanically how that works, because we're doing some really interesting things, just how Bitcoin works today. I feel just as an entrepreneur, working in a space like Bitcoin, which already has a lot of volatility, working within the design space of what Bitcoin can do today is like mitigating the risk of like, there's already so much risk when you start something that the last thing I need to also assume is that like Bitcoin's going to enable an upgrade that's going to let me do what I need. So we could kind of talk about that. But yeah, I've Bitcoiner, always been a big fan of your takes on Twitter. I think comedy and satire are like really good compressed forms of witticism. And you're always like dropping hot fire. And I would say I often keep in touch with the larger crypto ecosystem because I'm following your takes, and then I can kind of piece together the clown show our whole industry is going through.
Yeah, I think clown show is maybe honestly a bit endearing, in fact.
It is.
But okay, so I just wanted to ask, I definitely want to talk about AnchorWatch, but
sure.
So from 2013 to 2022, were you involved in any other Bitcoin projects? Were you, what were you doing in that period of time? Were you just like strictly learning about Bitcoin and then you jumped in, or what?
I was the token Bitcoin guy at whatever job I worked at. So I worked in ad tech for 10 years, like maintaining the whole back-end advertising servers for websites, whether they be live stream or ads on a website. Went to go work at some real-time bidding exchanges, which got me more involved in code, because in fractions of a millisecond, you're executing auctions to find out who's willing to pay the most for this ad space. And then I went to go be a consultant at IBM, then on to being a data scientist and consultant at IBM, working on like large data and like petabytes of data to do analytics and modeling when it came to marketing insight, optimizing large sales teams, CRM, and who they're going to call that day, taking like I said, petabytes of data to do like large churning analysis to find like who's the most impactful person they can talk to. And so I was, throughout this whole time, I was the token Bitcoin guy. I was, buying Bitcoin, learning more about Bitcoin self-custody, kind of like going down that technical rabbit hole and understanding how it all works and manages, and kind of like night lighting in Bitcoin. And so I actually didn't really come onto the Bitcoin scene, if you can call it that, in any real meaningful way until the pandemic, where there was this app, if you remember Clubhouse, where everyone was on doing social audio because everyone was locked in. And if you ever want to provoke someone to like get engaged with social media, listening to people say factually wrong statements is the easiest way to like. So I was just, I turned to like the Clubhouse equivalent of a reply guy, because I'd be like, I'm going on stage because that's just factually wrong, right? Like, people like whatever cockeyed like custody scheme or talking about like how Bitcoin works, and it was just all wrong. And so from there, I started getting familiar with just a lot of people that you would know from Bitcoin Twitter, like NVK, American Hodl, Brad Mills, like just Bitcoin people in general. And that's how I started, actually how I met most of my angel investors, as well as my co-founder when I started AnchorWatch, was in this lockdown era of 2020. And then I started posting more about Bitcoin on Twitter. And from there, started the company in 2022. Yeah.
Okay, great. So then, what is AnchorWatch?
So AnchorWatch, it's an old nautical term referring to the crew of sailors who watch the ship when it's at anchor, right? Like your overnight shift security. But that's kind of how we view ourselves in the custody landscape. So to super zoom out, if you are any sort of institutional custodian, the way it's really structured today is you deposit your funds, you use any of the large custodians that are holding your funds for you. What they do is they charge a SaaS fee, right? Some sort of percent under AUM, or if you're like a retail person, they don't even charge you, right? If you hold money at Coinbase, they don't charge you. But if you look at it under the hood, like people like emphasize the importance of self-custody is because they're not your keys. Like if something goes wrong, you don't get anything back. And maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, these large custodians started getting like omnibus insurance policies, right? So I think Coinbase has a $420 million insurance policy right now. If you actually go and look at their most recently quarterly statement, there's a line item on Coinbase's quarterly earnings, which is called Safeguarding Customer Crypto Assets. And that's $329 billion, right? So they have $329 billion of assets, and they have one $420 million policy to underwrite that. Additionally, it's only if like crime, it's a crime cover. So if the employees at Coinbase pull off an Ocean's 11 kind of heist, that's the only time it's really like materially covered for what I've been able to see. And additionally, at $420 million for $329 billion, you don't have to do the math to realize it's fractions of a penny per person. Additionally, you as the end consumer are not named on the insurance policy. It's Coinbase's policy, right? So it's at their discretion for the distribution and everything. So from a foundational like financial market and like evolution and maturation of Bitcoin, risk transferring, which is like an insurance contract, I saw was a big opportunity for kind of upgrading how institutional custody and just kind of better, if you're going to use a counterparty, the way you actually can transfer counterparty risk is by an insurance contract. And so that's kind of like the high level ecosystem. And when you think about it, it makes sense because if you're a custody provider and you get to charge a SaaS fee, you get to just pull all that margin to the bottom. And then if there's like a catastrophic loss event, you know, you're not on the hook financially, or no one's on the hook financially to actually pay you out. So as a service provider, it's almost like this natural like first order equilibrium that everyone goes to, because I could just charge SaaS fees. I'm providing a service. You give me $100 million, I charge you on the $100 million, not just like a licensing fee. And if something goes wrong, we'll try to do our best to get it back for you, but we're not financially indemnifying you. And so we wanted to kind of upgrade that financial model for as Bitcoin matures as an asset. And that kind of like dovetails into the technical side. So today in Bitcoin or in just any general cryptocurrency, you can do a single sig, you can do a multi-sig. I'm going to keep it more Bitcoin focused because most of my time in Bitcoin has been in the awareness. I'm aware of like Solidity contracts and like Gnosis vaults and things that can do multi-sigs on ETH and the like, but I'm going to keep, because what I'm building on specifically is in raw Bitcoin script and execution is today there's been this was also part of actually a year into the company, realizing that we first wanted to go after self-custody vaults. And we realized that the insurance markets really aren't interested in that kind of appetite of risk. So if you know Vic, he goes on Twitter by Seared Salmon. He used to be at Blockstream. He used to be at CoinKite. I was talking to him about like, I think I'm going to build custom Bitcoin vaults that can actually enable more functionality. Now, before I get into that, like, what do I mean? Well, one, like there's like, if you think about Bitcoin just as a technology, it's called Bitcoin script and how like coins get locked on chain. So you probably maybe like if you, the most basic one would be opcheck sig. Like, hey, is the signature valid, right? And you can go look at mempool.space or a block explorer. You can actually see like the script execute, and it's a stack-based language, and it's kind of archaic. It's this funny like touch that Satoshi had on how he just chose to design Bitcoin. It's very similar to language called Forth from the 70s. It's very memory efficient. So when you're thinking about a distributed system, it makes sense. But you have to kind of like go through your steps. And the opportunity identified was that multi-sig, how everyone uses Bitcoin today, came out in 2014 with pay to script hash, right? Where you have like a 2 of 3 and you do op check multi-sig and you check, hey, are these signatures good? But no one had really innovated beyond that. The only real like in a large scale production ready, a lot of people use are like hash time lock contracts, right? The Lightning Network uses. So, and stop me at any point here, like a hash time lock contract is basically this like 2 of 2 multi-sig that you have with a counterparty in a Lightning channel. And what happens is if I choose to close a channel, if I like have a channel with you and I choose to close it, the money, since I initiated the close, you could pull the money immediately if you want to. I have to wait. And I have to wait because actually Bitcoin has time locks. The last 2 upgrades before SendWit and Taproot were 2 soft forks that enabled an opcode. And I think this dovetails in maybe some of the conversation we're going to have later. These are time lock opcodes, op check lock time verify and op check sequence verify. Without going too deep in the technicals, they're basically a relative time lock and an absolute time lock. Right? So an absolute time lock is you can't move the money until block height 1,000,000. A relative time lock is once I receive the money, in 100 blocks you can move it, right? And so we needed these time lock mechanisms to actually enable the Lightning Network's functionality. Because otherwise, I could close a channel and immediately rug the money, and if I cheated you, you wouldn't have a time to respond. So the ultimate realization came to be, we have time locks in Bitcoin. We also have like functions like op if, op else. So you can do like if else statements, but no one was using them. And it was a big head scratcher for me. And this is coming up on the fall of 2023, where I was like, we have a lot of development and work going into Bitcoin, but no one's really doing anything more than a single sig or I call legacy multi-sig, 2 of 3, 3 of 5, what have you. And that's kind of where that's kind of like the problem space. And then the solution came forth talking with Vic. He was like, Rob, you're great. You're smart. You're not that great. You're not that smart. And this was around, I was going to make custom Bitcoin script. He said, just use Miniscript. And I was like, I've been in Bitcoin for a while. I haven't heard of Miniscript. And I actually found an Andrew Polstra talk from London BitDevs 2020, where he had just finished with Peter Will and Sanket building Miniscript. And this was like a total like paradigm shift in me thinking about how Bitcoin can work today within the current consensus tools. And that's what we are building on, is this tool Miniscript to enable more advanced multi-sig functionality, more advanced Bitcoin security for layer 1 Bitcoin. So I know it's a lot, so I'll just stop there for a second.
No, that's great. I love it when people ramble. It takes a lot of burden off me. Okay, so I know you. I actually initially maybe I knew you as the Miniscript guy. So I guess you kind of solidified yourself as. So were you the one who kind of reinvigorated? I mean, I know you reinvigorated the talks about Miniscript, right? But it seems like, just roll with this. Like, what was your thinking with Miniscript, and then. Maybe you can relate that back to AnchorWatch and like what you're doing now. Again, a little bit more specific. Yeah,
so it was, I think I became like the Miniscript guy. I kind of did it as like self-satirizing of like calling myself a Miniscript influencer, just to really be a little bit self-deprecating, but also kind of really loudly banging the drums because this is free open source software. And there's a lot of people building in Bitcoin and no one's really touching this, right? I bought miniscript.com, which told me that like, okay, really no one's even doing anything with this because this is just sitting here. Right now I have it redirected to the original website that Peter Will put up that just has all the Miniscript information. And Miniscript actually just got a BIP like 2 weeks ago. I'm not taking any credit for that, to be clear. But a lot of the conversation was just like, people should be paying attention to this. And I actually think there's a lot of wisdom in what Rindell has said about this, where like Miniscript is like a developer enablement kit. It is not something end customers should ever have to think or worry about, right? It is a developer tool. And that's, knowing my niche and like my circles of people I do in Bitcoin, I know a lot of developers in Bitcoin, and that's why I started talking very loudly about it. And so what it enables is, if you could think almost of it like Lego bricks, you can take like an AND statement, an OR statement, a multi-sig, a time lock, and you can start combining all of these things together to do really interesting vaults. The most simple one everyone thinks about when we're talking about like more expressive Bitcoin smart contracts, right, is like I want a 2 of 3 multi-sig where if the funds haven't moved in a year, make it a 1 of 3 multi-sig, right? It's some sort of like contingency situation, right? Anyone who's just using their Bitcoin for like bunker coin cold storage hodl, it makes sense to have contingencies. And that was kind of like the first thing being tossed about. But you also can do what's called a threshold of thresholds, or like a multi-sig of multi-sigs, right? And so that's what we're leveraging at AnchorWatch, that actually for the duration of your insured vault, AnchorWatch has to co-sign and the customer has to co-sign. And immediately you would be concerned and say, well, wait a second. What if AnchorWatch ceases to exist? What if, we are malevolent? Well, one, for the length of your insurance contract, we are a required co-signer for all of the transactions. But when the insurance contract expires, the calendar date that it expires with some extra padding time, you can unilaterally just pull the money out of the vault, which is a totally different concept compared to what you have with any other custodian. If you want to take your money out of custodian, you have to call them or log into your API or whoever, and you have to make a withdrawal request. Fundamentally, if we are no longer materially holding the risk for the asset itself, it's your property, you should be able to move it, right? And so we're able to do this like really interesting bespoke linking. And this is where it got very interesting from a design space, talking about how Bitcoin can work today. You can do time locks based on a calendar time. This is actually a really interesting thing. I know Aaron from Held Money Pod's been talking about this, about like, the relationship of time and Bitcoin. Time is the only external input into how Bitcoin works. So the miners, when they create a block, put a timestamp saying this is the time I found the block. And there's actually like 2 guardrails on how time can be kept, like in Bitcoin. A miner cannot put a timestamp that is more than 2 hours into the future of what my local node's time is. And it has to be greater than the median time of the past 11 blocks. So you actually have this like rough, like drifting clock that's within a reasonable period of time accurate. And you can set time locks to those thresholds, right? And this is where I think that just fundamentally very interesting. I kept banging this drum about Bitcoin being programmable money, and we're not doing anything with it, right? And so this idea that you could take a legal contract and you can actually overlay it with an actual Bitcoin smart contract, and that's something that is a Bitcoin smart contract that doesn't require a consensus change. It doesn't require any sort of extra permission. It works with the Ledger hardware wallet. It works with the Cold Card. It works with the Blockstream Jade. It works with the Spectre DIY. And it works with the Bitbox 02. Like there's now like a decent ecosystem of players that are, supporting this. And that's a really just an interesting idea. Like I'm using it for this context of insurance and self-custody hybrid. Like I call it joint custody because it is actually materially both people need to sign off on it. That's like just my use case for it, right? And I think it's just a really interesting design space to think about as people are building solutions and products and applications on Bitcoin, that most decisions up to this point have been abstracted to the application layer, where you maybe have some sort of like threshold limit or like whitelist, but like, this goes into the covenant conversation of like how you can spend your Bitcoin. We're actually able to kind of like on-chain distribute risk, which is also really complementary to insurance, to be able to say that, even if, just to tie this in just from the product perspective, if you as the customer actually lost all of your keys, we have like a small grace window where us and a third party could actually help move the funds for you. So even if you lost all of your keys, we're able to indemnify you. And if for whatever reason that doesn't work out, you have a insurance policy that backs behind it specifically to your vault too. So it's an insurance policy in your name with your Bitcoin tied to it specifically. So you don't have this weird dynamic where it's almost like custodians, they get an insurance policy. It's like you're a landlord with like 15 properties and you have one property insurance policy. And you're like, but it's so unlikely all of the other houses will burn down at the same time. It's like, you can't do that in the physical world for insurance. And it shouldn't really be an acceptable standard when you're thinking about institutional capital and players. All of the ETFs are sitting at Coinbase. They don't have incremental insurance policies, right? They're all sharing that one policy with everyone. That 420 million policy is for everyone.
And they're all on open dimes, right?
That's right. Everything is. I love that. Just to keep behind the curtain, Rydell's theory behind this is that they are one-time use legacy single sig addresses. And I'm quite sure they're using NPC under the hood, right? It's not just literally a single sig. But on chain, the behavior of the open dime of the ETF funds is identical if they were using an open dime. It's a one-time use legacy single sig address. So Yeah, we can't prove it's not open times.
Yeah. So just like kind of rounding this off then. So who do you
Sure.
view as your kind of like target customer for AnchorWatch?
Sure.
Like it sounds like you want to take on big custodians, right? Like you seem to think there's like a pretty big market opportunity, like a pretty big flaw in the way that their structure works insurance wise. Like, but yeah, who do you see as like your go-to customer?
Ultimately agnostic in the sense of like the take over the world plan is just being able to offer insurance as a layer to however Bitcoin is being secured anywhere. For what I've been talking about at this point, kind of like our initial flagship product, I view this as being high net worth individuals, any family office, any Bitcoin business with a treasury, anyone who's like long-term cold storage, right? Just they want to have, they've already made the leap of, okay, Bitcoin is volatile. There is price, like there's volatility risk in there. But the last thing you want is also key man risk, right? Because there are people who bought coins on FTX and they were directionally right that Bitcoin's going to go up in price, but it was all sitting on the ledger in Sam's desk. And so now they have nothing, even if they were directionally right on the bat. So anyone like whether high net worth individual or any commercial business who's looking just for a better wrapper to actually be able to help them from an identification standpoint, from a de-risking standpoint, to actually have that, all opportunity to be customers.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. All right. Well, I feel like we got a good rundown on AnchorWatch. Let me ask you, what do you think about this, like very broad strokes here? It's almost like annoyingly broad. What is the state of Bitcoin development, and are you increasingly excited about it?
Yeah, I am excited about it. There's this interesting, I would say, schism culturally in Bitcoin. So I actually, to start this conversation for when there was really a big shift, this was right after, so this was February of last year. And this is right after I'd been working on the Miniscript stuff for a couple months, and Casey went to Bitcoin Park to talk about ordinals because ordinals had just launched. And I got to meet Casey. It was the busiest I'd ever seen Bitcoin Park up to that point. A lot of people came in for his workshop, like drove in from multiple states. And for me, what was interesting and what I loved about what Casey did is he didn't have to ask anyone for permission. He just took the design space of how Bitcoin exists and he made everyone almost like a spectator to his spectacle, because, he was just like, well, you can't stop it. And it had this really interesting cultural repercussion. And a couple weeks later, I went on What Bitcoin Did with Peter McCormick. And because he asked me to do an ordinals breakdown. Like I did not ask him to go on the show and do ordinals. He's like, Rob, I need someone technical. Like, can you come on and talk about ordinals? And I did. And I made a comment saying that this is an inflection point for Bitcoin culture. And that we're going to look back on this as an interesting ecosystem shift, because now everyone's realizing that Bitcoin can do more, right? It may be hacky, it may be using things like sequencers, but like there is more to Bitcoin than just this rock, which has been a very popular narrative, I think, also just promoted by the larger crypto ecosystem, because it makes sense to try and bifurcate that and be like, well, Bitcoin's not competing against this market share. We can go tackle this market share. And it's been very interesting to see the development culturally, as well as just technically thinking about what can be done with Bitcoin. And I think the best that we have right now are these like faux layer twos that are using a sequencer or a multi-sig. As a side note, I've been making this point for a while that anyone who's building a layer 2 based on a multisig should just be using Miniscript, because the idea that you would only want to have like X of Y, M of N multisig securing a bunch of money, it would make sense to me to have a lot more contingencies and you can actually be more secure in that sense, but that's a different conversation. I've been trying to be an open, honest spectator to it, understanding that I don't have perfect information, and trying to understand if we are going to be upgrading Bitcoin, like kind of what can come with that. I'm a proponent of covenants in general. I was a proponent of CTV that Jeremy Rubin put out. And, James O'Byrne did a lot of work with OpVault. And really tragically, like internally reflecting on the Bitcoin community, that stuff got no traction whatsoever. It was, it really, like, Jeremy had done a lot of work. He actually forked the Miniscript library to make covenants work with it, with his programming language Sapio. And this is all before I even learned about how Miniscript even works under the hood, really. He had built a bunch of demos, and no one was really caring. It was just kind of this blasé, like, well, why do I need this? And then I think the word need is a really tricky thing to throw in there, because like Bitcoin did not need maybe the Lightning Network, but the Lightning Network got 3 soft forks to enable it. It got those 2 time lock opcodes I talked about, because you couldn't make the Lightning Network channel work without the time lock. And it also got SegWit to remove transaction malleability, right? And so when you start putting it into context, like, did we need these things? It's like, no, we didn't need these things. But like, if we want Bitcoin to do more things, you need to have a conversation around like, what is the design space of what you want? And I feel fundamentally, a lot of people in Bitcoin almost culturally pride themselves on this, like, well, Bitcoin is already this divine ordained thing and it will always exist. And for me, I'm thinking about, as someone who builds applications in Bitcoin, like, if we could have more tools, how can I better serve customers? How could I better protect my own coins, right? And I think a lot of the discourse over the past year or so, post Casey dropping like a hand grenade onto the scene, has been really productive. And I've been kind of very openly going through that journey, thinking about things like OpCat. At the start, I had a lot of misinformation, just flat out, just like I had relied on third-party information of like, oh, with OpCat, it could emulate checksig from stack. And because it can emulate checksig from stack, you basically could do whatever the hell you want in a arbitrary computation. And really just quickly walking through, like, listen to people who are actually reviewing that code, getting an increased understanding of, okay, you know, you can't have that. I actually had a question around MEV, just the idea of like, does this bring about with these aggregators and rollups? Do you actually bring some sort of general sense of MEV to Bitcoin, which, even though technically, yes, concatenating 2 bytes isn't hard, does it have second, third order consequences to be concerned about? And I asked that question on the Bitcoin.review podcast with Andrew Polstra and Reindahl and NVK, because I thought it was a good voice of the people that people talk about, like, well, what are the unforeseen consequences? And Andrew very concisely laid out why that isn't a thing. And to paraphrase him, there are 2 key things that non-Bitcoin blockchains have that Bitcoin does not. 1, they have an account-based model. And 2, they have a global key value pair lookup, right? So you can look at like an AMM and you can see like the bids and the asks coming in. And all of that is globally referenceable, and you can in real time rearrange that to accrue more value to yourself. Bitcoin does not structurally have those things. With the UTXO model and with I can't query, okay, well, how much Gwart coin is on this ordinal? Like, you can't do that natively within the scripting language. So you're already like, you don't have first class token support, right? And so these are interesting conversations that I've actually, by walking in with eyes open, going through the journey and understanding the discourse, I've learned more about Bitcoin. I have stronger conviction in Bitcoin. I understand more about how Bitcoin works. And for me, I think it's all positive, healthy development and discussion. I think also in general, not even just from any arbitrary crypto like context, using Bitcoin as programmable money. And I think a lot of the Bitcoin ecosystem right now, with the mindset that I have, that you can't assume an upgrade's going to happen, have been putting a lot of emphasis on eCash and Fedimints and Casio, which I think are all great options. I've played around with some of them. And basically that's an application layer decision of like, since we can't get XYZ thing on chain, can we do stablecoins within a Fedimint, right? Can we do like yield offering on Fedimints? Can we just do the anonymous payments? And those are all interesting ways working within the current design space that I think also just helps inform people if they're building other solutions. What does it look like, right? It's been very interesting. I went to Bitcoin Plus Plus in Austin a couple of months ago, and that was an amazing conference, which also dovetailed into Rusty Russell's The Great Script Restoration, which I think is really like the Bitcoin technical community as a group. I know Rusty put the proposal forth, but has been talking to a lot of people, and people are thinking about this idea now of, you know, when Satoshi in 2010 turned off OpCat, he turned off like 9 other opcodes. We understand Bitcoin as a distributed system more now. What would it look like if we were to turn those things back on? And instead of, and the way Rusty puts it, I think is really interesting, is rather than being like this ordained class of developers saying, yes, this opcode and upgrade is the way people should use Bitcoin, should we just enable low-level tooling like a concatenation or an or and like string parsing? Should we just let that be the core little building blocks and let 1,000 flowers bloom? And that's been a really interesting like discourse to see evolve over time. I think it's all overall just generally bullish. I think it's going to take time for people to fully internalize these ideas and think about what would it take to build more advanced tools on top of them. I know with Cat, I was talking to a cryptographer at Bitcoin Plus Plus, and I asked him, I was like, so you can do Starks on Bitcoin if you have OpCat. How big are these proofs? And he said, under the consensus limit, which makes me think, so you're telling me there's a chance, it's technically possible. There are interesting conversations to be had. And the way I've been thinking about this is that if you were to have these kind of things activate, you're going to have many companies with venture capital funding. I'm venture capital funded. I have nothing against that. But just thinking through the network health that are going to be able to subsidize large swaths of block space to get their rollups on chain. And what does that do for the larger ecosystem? Because if anyone wants to have a candid self-evaluation of Bitcoin, when the fee spiked because of ordinals, a lot of Lightning broke down. Now, that wasn't really at the protocol level as much as it was a lot of the applications that were being built on top of it. And a lot of users of Bitcoin didn't fully understand this idea of liquidity and opening channels and splicing in new liquidity into channels. And it made it all of a sudden that, like, if you weren't already buckled up and locked in on your Lightning channel before the fee market took off, you were going to have to pay through the nose to get into the Lightning network, right? And so I think it's a good, healthy stress test for the existing applications and protocols, right? Understanding like, hey, fees are not going to be one sap or B-byte forever. You have to go do something about it. And just overall for Bitcoin's ecosystem health and maturity, you need to have a robust block space market because you need to be able to have miners get compensated as we go out for years and years to come with the halvings. There needs to be some sort of transactional use that are paying the miners to use it. And the more people that are using the chain, the more expensive it is with more fees per block, the more secure Bitcoin is in the sense that the miners are getting compensated more. There's a higher economic cost to roll back chains, right? These are all things I think are positive elements thinking about Bitcoin. I'm very much from the camp that I think Bitcoin probably could have not done an upgrade and been okay. But the ultimate question is like designing a system, like what should we be thinking about including? And I think it's been all really healthy discourse for battle testing the current devs, thinking about the design system, what can be done with future stuff. I know Rindell's done the perfect vault, which has like 22 cat operations to put stuff together because he's building the transaction on the stack. And this is where it gets really funny. Just like why is cat so cool from the development? Why does cat specifically open up like a Pandora's box, right? But like I think Polstra said on the mailing list, 95% of the time I think about if I wanted to do something new with Bitcoin script, OpCat could do it. And for the other 5%, it's not much more than that. And like there's two kind of core things that Cat enables to do, just for the general audience who maybe at a high level is following the discourse but doesn't understand the details, is you actually, this Bitcoin script stack I was talking about earlier with like time locks and checking signatures, op if and else, you actually can take elements of a transaction and build that on the stack, which means that you can pre-commit to how you're spending your money in the future, which is a covenant. And that's what Rindell is able to do with the perfect vault. And additionally, catting allows you to basically rebuild Merkle trees on chain. This is a little bit like the cat VM stuff that the wizards did. These are all like conceptually, I don't see why people should be able to build a Merkle tree on chain. Like and just the ominous, like there are unforeseen consequences. Like there's also opportunity costs for not doing things, right? I think a lot of people who are building and working on Lightning would champion and say, you know what, the 3 soft forks it took to get Lightning are worth it because I, take a lot of pride and value in the ecosystem building on Lightning. And it also has help and support for things like Fedi mints and interoperability between mints because you have Lightning. Like it's a very powerful tool that helps a lot of people that are building in Bitcoin today. And if we took the other side of, well, we don't know what possibly could happen if we do SegWit, which mind you are massive code changes. What is the opportunity cost of not doing something, right? So I tried to, if there are concrete observations of why X thing would be bad, I'm all ears and I want to kind of threat model and go through it. I've been very patiently through my own journey, thinking for myself and talking to people who I think understand this stuff better than me to navigate the technical details, like talking to someone like an Andrew Polstra. Overall, I think this is a really healthy, positive development. And I think ultimately this is a narrative we used to have in Bitcoin. was that whatever you do on those other chains, we're going to, like, you can do whatever you want, and then we're just going to appropriate it because it's free open source software. Everyone's free open source software. This was a mantra when I got into Bitcoin in 2013 through 2015, was that they can all do their silly games. Whatever happens, it comes back and bring to us. And there may be a future where we can actually have a lot of the crypto associated things in a way that doesn't have any of the baggage of validators or block constructor. Like it's interesting as a concept that we may be able to get a lot more native support for just people would associate traditionally with crypto assets. But it doesn't even mean to say that you have Taproot assets, RGB. People are trying to do this tokenization of assets within the existing Bitcoin framework, and they've gotten little adoption at this point. I think RGB just finalized its spec. Taproot assets just did its first mainnet transaction. So it's early days for them. But that isn't to say that, like, if we are enabling a new block of ways of executing it, that there couldn't even be better ways of going about it, right? There's obviously an appeal and a demand from people that are building within Bitcoin for these kind of tools. So reevaluating what tools are in the toolbox, I think, is just a really healthy discourse just as Bitcoin matures.
Yeah. Okay. So then to that end, like what use cases do you really want to see? And maybe one other tangent on that, just because you just run with it, which is great, but I want to make sure I get both these questions in.
Sure.
The other thing is, like, what you said, maybe my Twitter feed is like the extent of your like crypto, up to date on crypto, but like, what have you seen elsewhere that you're like, oh, this is very cool, right? Like we talk about, because that, this was always the idea, like all of these are L2s, like all these are test nets for Bitcoin. What have we seen elsewhere, right? And it's interesting because I just want to like add one other thing. It's interesting because like I interviewed Eric Wall the first episode, and like he gives a very different answer as to what use cases we may want, right? Like I'm talking to Eric Wall, he's like, we want lending, AMA, like all these things. And then I talked to somebody like Alex P, and he's like, I mean, cheap payments on an L2 or something, right? Like it's interesting to hear from different Bitcoiners as to what functionality we want.
I actually, when I think about use cases, one, just objectively evaluating the ecosystem from a product market fit standpoint, stablecoins. I may not be a user of stablecoins, but if you're just looking agnostically at like how the ecosystem works, stablecoins have massive value, right? Undoubtedly so. I think on-chain lending also makes a lot of sense. I think fundamentally it does. When you think about now, this is maybe where I'm brushing up against the edges of my knowledge, but if I want to do a Bitcoin-backed loan today, I'm paying double-digit interest rates, and that's using US dollars, using some sort of loan provider. And on-chain, if I were to do the same thing with like a wrapped Bitcoin, it's much less. Now, the skeptic in me would say, well, there's a lot of contagion risk, like there's custodian risk because WBTC is all custodial. And then there's like the market maker that manages that loan with the stable coins could also have risk, right? So you're thinking about it, it's riskier. Maybe that's why they're incentivizing with lower pricing. All of that said, you could design better tools where you have a better custody assurances on layer one Bitcoin if you're able to enable more advanced scripting, right?
Yeah,
the loan concept and stables. Yeah.
I think this is like actually, I'm going to interview him soon. One of my good friends in Bitcoin, like building with DLCs.
Oh yeah.
And his model is like, this will upset a lot of the crypto natives, but his model is like effectively the same trust model as like something like Aave. And if you're using like Aave with native ETH, but with Aave with wrapped BTC, this is better. Like you're always taking on Oracle risk with these things, right? Like and we can do this with DLC. So, but yeah, like I totally agree. Like lending is a very obvious use case. Stable coins, I'll just give you my opinion, then I'll let you. Like I want to hear what your response is to this. Like, and this actually the same kid convinced me of this too. Like the thing about stable coins that I'm just not convinced yet that people actually care where their stable coins are trading, and I'm also not convinced that stablecoins need to be on a maximally decentralized layer unless they are truly a decentralized stablecoin. Like at the end of the day, like if you're using USDC, like they'll come after you. It's not like, of course, Ethereum isn't going to come after you, but USDC will just blacklist your address. This is my opinion.
I don't even know how that's controversial, because I think USDT on Tron kind of shows the whole thing. Right. The fact that Tron has so much usage, no one's thinking that Tron is the ultimate solution to the Byzantine generals problem. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like if you're doing the low quick payments, no one really cares. My understanding of, I think that's the opportunity to open up the stablecoin market so other providers are able to go for it makes sense to
Yeah,
me. Like
huge.
I know like was it the Mountain Protocol, like being able to offer yield back to people, like that just natively makes a lot of sense for me because people are able to make a lot of money just sitting on treasuries. And there's other, like, you buy your treasuries, you pay out your yield, like you get to hold the yield yourself and you pass it on to customers. I think this is like the next leg of the evolution of the market. And to my understanding, like I love the concept of decentralized stablecoins. What I have seen, wasn't it DAI that just ended up being mostly Tether and USDC anyway, right?
It all
like
reverts back. It always reverts back. Yeah.
Right. So like, I don't profess to have a deep enough understanding of how do you fix that problem.
You don't.
I know,
don't think.
There was a Fedimint hackathon project a while back that was like one of the projects was like getting stable coins within Fediments. So that would be Bitcoin natively backed. I just don't know. It sounds like from observations of how the market has conducted itself, all of the liquidity just goes back to stable coins anyway. You put stable coins in, so you have your decentralized stable coin, which is being held up by centralized stable coins.
Yeah.
And so like, I don't know how you ultimately bridge that. I think better payments works too, though. It's just like another use case. Like I think Lightning is great, but a payment channel has natural design constraints in how it operates compared to things like a roll-up aggregation, right? And I think letting 1,000 flower blooms is the best way to understand like where people would want to deploy their money, where would people want to transact on a day-to-day basis, where you don't have to worry about liquidity problems. I know people are working on this with things like ARC in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I don't profess to be deep enough on the knowledge space of like how it solves that, but I'm told that it fixes a lot of inbound liquidity problems. But there's definitely UX trade-offs, right? Like if I use Lightning all the time. I work out of Bitcoin Park. It's the hat I'm wearing. And we have a little Bitcoin BTC Pay terminal where we buy your water or your snacks, whatever, through the terminal. And it works very reliably for me. But I am like a power user who's dialed in on that. And I've used Lightning with people who are newer, and it you have channels that fail or payments that didn't process or there's a lag, and things like a rollup can allow for inter-user settlement and not have to worry about like the routing of the whole network. So I think ultimately not being as tribal and fixated on like this is the way to do it, and letting developers and protocol architects think about like how they can solve problems for users or their customers, whoever it is at the end of the day.
I think I think it will be a failure of Bitcoin if there's not a cheap L2 where somebody can onboard you directly, send you money directly. Like this is really like, there are things that Ethereum gets right, and being able to send, I mean, it's Base, okay, it's from my Coinbase, but being able to send somebody money directly on Base, and now with their like onboarding process, you can buy money on Coin. I mean, we may have ideological like reservations about this, but like you can buy money on Coinbase and send it directly to an L2 for near zero cost. Like this is obviously something that like is a massive like unlock, right? In my opinion. So
I'm very big on user choice as long as like the vulnerabilities and the trade-offs are being disclosed honestly, right?
Yeah.
I think something like Base, for me, like if people are enjoying it and they're using it and they understand it's Coinbase's like proprietary corporate layer 2, like that's cool with me, man. It's not, this is where like, just as like I would say from a libertarian standpoint, like what you do with your money is your business, and like sending stable coins around on Base by spending, receiving money doesn't seem like some sort of big problem to me. And I think when you're thinking about this, like the ecosystem, I think it naturally makes sense that you're going to have subject matter experts. Like you hire a bunch of protocol engineers at Coinbase, and they're going to be able to furnish a better product than like what's out on the open market. And they're able to make a lot of efficiencies and trade-offs because it's all running within their system. They have great enterprise security, independent of whatever I think about their like insurance for how they custody customers' assets. Like they have very good engineers who are working on hard problems. Like it all seems like a fair trade-off to me. And I think in a Bitcoin world where this stuff gets turned on, there would be many, many options, just like a lot of Bitcoiners think about. There'd be many Fedimints and eCash bags that could do a lot of things. And I think the rollups could maybe provide even greater cryptographic certainty of, this balance is yours and no one can move it unless you provide information around it, right? This goes on the edges of my knowledge of understanding zero knowledge proofs and Starks and whatnot. But I think there's better assurances there because if someone cheats, you can kind of prove that someone cheated. Whereas if it's a custodian, you get rugged. It's too bad, too sad.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question. You have to answer yes or no.
Done.
Are rollups a scaling solution?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Now, like as someone, and I'll just say definitively yes. The important constraints and valves on that are like how often is the rollup updating, how much block space does it take, and what's its transaction throughput, right?
Okay,
those are all like the meaningful dials. Like,
the reason I ask this is because this is another thing that I think Ethereum has gotten right. And if you listen to the people that understand this, I think they are transparent about this. They say that rollups scale ETH the asset. They don't scale Ethereum itself, right? So the context for this in my mind is I have a friend who's a Bitcoiner who says, and when he rationalizes this to me, he says rollups are a block size increase. And when it was explained to me, I was like, okay, I think you may be right. What are your thoughts on that first, and then, or maybe if you want me to elaborate, but that's
please. No, I want to hear more. Yeah, break that because I'm cursory on rollup stuff. I'm not like deep in the weeds.
Well,
on
me
it,
too.
So.
Me too.
Okay.
Like I'm less technical than you are, but like what he's saying is this: like when, like in order to truly verify a rollup, you need a proof, right? Like you need that proof on the L1, and these proofs. Like, so there's this interesting thing where they're talking like this modularization elsewhere in crypto, right? And like this data availability thing. And you need that data to reconstruct the chain. Like you absolutely need that. So if you're using one of these alt DAs or whatever, then that's not like truly, like you can't verify that yourself, right? And his rationale is that like you can plug in, like, you know, there's this whole idea about like plugging in like SDK verifier. But in order to like, roll back, I'm not using the right word there, but recreate the L2 state onto the L1, you would need to generate that proof, right?
Right. Okay.
In order to generate that proof, well, what are we working with right now? Like, it looks like increasingly massive ASICs and like a ton of energy spend. So I think, I don't know, that's his rationale. I don't know how well I did it justice, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so to paraphrase that back to you, in a happy state where no one's cheating, which isn't right. It's a naive assumption, but let's just go with that for a moment because most Lightning channels exist with people not like doing forced closes or like redemptions. Where like Lightning has a similar mechanism where like if we're happy, we don't have to do an on-chain transaction because everyone's aligned and simpatico with each other. But if you try to cheat me, I have to put a fraud proof on chain. That's what a hash time lock contract is. I reveal a pre-image, and I now take up necessarily more block space to, on layer 1 Bitcoin, prove to you that you cheated to me. Because I can basically reveal a pre-image that you previously gave to me that shows that you are rolling back the state of the chain, right, of this payment channel. So I think there's two interesting statements you said there that to unpack. Is one, rollups scale ETH the asset, but not ETH the network. And two, that you basically have to like recreate the stuff on chain, which are kind of going around the same point here, is that in a happy state, you just have your proof being posted on chain. It's somewhere under 4 megabytes, right? Which is also like a big thing too, where if you have multiple of these rollups running at once and one block gets found every 10 minutes, they're going to all be aggressively trying to pay fees to be the one that confirms it finalizes on chain, right? Think about it. If there's like 5 rollups that are trying to, I don't even pretend to understand at the moment how these designs are working for like how often are they? They're not trying to go every block, I'm assuming. Because if they're trying to go every block and you have 10 of them trying to go every block and each of them are 400 kilobytes, there's no more space for regular transactions on the network. And this was my comment before about like being venture funded, is they'll all burn fees intentionally to make sure they get into that next block. So that's just like, so to your point about how it not scaling because it doesn't increase transaction throughput, is in a world where people are cheating, you necessarily have to like you eat up a bunch of block space that would just go to normal transactions. I think that's like on its face obviously true. Is that from the fraud proof, like whether you're using a bit VM or a roll up, there is some sort of like verifier prover system and a fraud proof challenge where if you cheat, I have to take up that block space. I I would look to the Lightning Network and say that most of the time people are not cheating, and so it's great. But if every single time you did a Lightning payment, your partner tried cheating you and you had to push a bunch of space on chain to like take it up, like that, you would hit the same conundrum. So I think any scaling solution that inherently goes back to layer one Bitcoin, you're going to hit this throughput where if people are not honest, it's a shitty scaling solution because you're always going to be like closing your channel or doing the fraud proof on chain. And I think the way I would think about that, not someone who's ever interacted with these rollups as a user, but just thinking about how I would think about it is I would view it with a level of suspicion that shit may go sideways, right? It's kind of like my hot money in my pocket that I'm willing to go to the casino and lose and not my like life holdings. That's kind of like how I, as a Bitcoiner, think about it. But yeah.
Thanks for listening to The Gwart Show on the Blockspace Podcast Network. Subscribe to our newsletter at blockspace.media to get the show directly to your inbox. Show links, transcripts, and Bitcoin articles twice per week. Stay ahead of the conversation by visiting blockspace.media.
Like, it's so fascinating, right? You go back on, read like old Bitcoin talk, and you see Greg Maxwell explaining that, you know, you can't scale blockchains with blockchains. What do you think about this with regards to rollups, right? Like the thing is like with these rollups, you're still like, you're creating another global state. And in many ways, like ideally scaling looks more like Lightning. And so, in my opinion, right? Like for Bitcoin, at least, whatever they do elsewhere. But like the peer-to-peer nature of Lightning, and yeah, like Lightning nodes are pretty cumbersome. I've actually never spun one up. I have Bitcoin nodes. I have a Lightning node. But like I do think this is my thought. I don't know this factually, but I think that running a Lightning node is probably still easier than running a truly trustless L2 rollup node, because you need to run like, go ahead.
Yeah. Objectively true, right? Because by the nature of Lightning, you and me have a channel. I don't need to know about anyone else on the Lightning Network. I just need to make sure that you're not screwing with me. So it necessarily pulls the design space, like the threat model, to my immediate channel partners who I choose. I choose who I open a Lightning channel with. So like, I don't have to care about what everyone else is doing on the network. I mean, I agree with that like, that it's everything in Bitcoin goes back to an old Greg Maxwell post on.
Yeah, I know, right?
Or an IRC log chat. Like everything, it's all it's turtles all the way down until you find the Greg Maxwell post, basically. I think it's funny. Like you've I think you've been really interrogating this issue because you're asking great questions I had directly considered before, as someone who's on the periphery of like the roll-up conversation. You can't scale it. I guess it goes back to like, how often are people being honest? Because if people are just going to try, like, I go back to the Lightning channel example. If every time your Lightning peer tried screwing you, you'd have to do the force close channel. It's not really great. And then there's a huge capital cost to close the channel and then open up a new one. You're paying transaction fees both times. I wonder if that makes a world where, I can't even try. I love like theory crafting, game theory, and economic actors and stuff, but like I don't even understand like the deepest level enough to even like on the fly try and spitball something. Scaling blockchains with blockchains, I think it's funny hearing Greg phrase it that way.
Well, you know, honestly, sorry, I think I read that from Greg. I almost positive Greg Maxwell did say that, but he definitely said something almost exactly like, because there's long when it talks about sidechains, right? Like this has gone back and forth from like, you know, Satoshi was around, they were talking about sidechains. So like, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm just thinking out loud that like, you know, in a world where rollups get activated, there's no reason why something like the Liquid Federation couldn't just become a sidechain that's actually pegging as a rollup into Bitcoin, right? Like there's no this is in 2014 when like sidechains were like the topic du jour, and this idea that whatever anyone else does in crypto will just bring back to Bitcoin. The two-way peg has kind of eluded us up to this point. And I think like rollups are a vehicle to kind of enable this two-way ecosystem where you can have you can call it your dumb money, simple like digital gold Bitcoin that can kind of like leave to go do something in the rollup, and then it can come back for settlement. This is, I guess, where all the data availability memes come from, because everyone's trying to sell. They're not even trying to sell the picks and shovels. They're just trying to sell the quarries where you could go do the picks and shovels.
Yeah, but the thing, like, in Super Testnet, of course, like, I said this recently, like, just very, very funny person, by the way, for my crypto
He's
followers.
a great guy.
He's like a very, very, like, interesting person. But like he was ripping on rollups, and like it's true. There's all these like DA solutions now, right? And it's like, okay, data, like this is a like critical part of running a blockchain node, like the data availability, right? Like, yeah, sure, you can spin up other blockchains to store that, but like that's the whole point. Like people don't want to run these nodes that require all this data to recreate the state and recreate the blockchain. That's functionally what's happening. So they're pushing it off elsewhere. It's like you guys created this problem, right? By having all this statefulness, and now you got to like dish it off to these other chains. And like, of course, there's like, I have a friend who works at Celestia, and they'll say, well, we can use like these like SVP effectively proofs. And it's like, okay, but it's still like, you're not running the node, right? Put like, and all, I don't know. I think it's just funny because like that is a core part of the like running a node for a blockchain, right? So it's funny.
Yeah, it's funny because you basically bring all of the critiques Bitcoiners have to Ethereum to Bitcoin, because like no one's going to be running the full nodes, validating all this stuff. It'd be like no one runs an archival ETH node. You know what I mean? It'd be like, well, yeah, no one's running like random rollup like as a full node validator to run the challenge proofs to even begin with, right?
Right.
It's an interesting point. What I'm actually really just excited about is that the discussion's happening now about how this works in Bitcoin, because this is not something 3 years ago that would even been a conversation. It would have been totally, you're a shitcoiner, don't even want to talk about. And like, I like hearing people like Super Testnet, he's great. I've seen him, you know, like he like the Pleb Lab down in Austin, they have a great shop over there. This random Super Testnet story. I love he last Bitcoin plus 2 years ago, he came out with a way for miners to do on-chain trustless bets for hash rate, and it totally works. You actually just use Taproot and you put your money into this Taproot address, and then you have two tap leads, like two ways you can spend the Bitcoin. One is using a block height timestamp, and one is using the clock, like calendar timestamp. And if you think hash rate's going to increase, you think the block number condition is going to happen first. But if you think hash rate's going to like plateau or go down,
I see.
Actually, at the time-based one first. And I was like, that's a really novel concept, because as a little quirk of Bitcoin script, before Taproot, you cannot have I call it, you can only bring one clock. You only can have a either the block height time lock or a calendar time lock. And this is actually something they didn't realize until they were building Miniscript. Like, oh, wait a second, the way how we check the time locks, basically in Bitcoin, if the number's under 500 million for the time lock value, it's assumed to be a block time lock. But if it's over 500 million, it's assumed to be a calendar, like clock-based time lock. And you can't be both above and below 500 million at the same time. So it's like literally impossible until Taproot. Anyway, so like Super Testnet is always like deep in the weeds, figuring out like these new like fun ways to do stuff. I'm just happy the discourse is happening. Right. I think for me, I've been able to chat with a lot of people who've put a lot of thought into this. Like a really great guy is Reardon Code, who's now like an engineer over at Swan. He was also building out the proposal for LN Hands, which was another way of doing like a scaling with CTV and checksig from Stack. I just love that a little bit of the energy is back. I think about it from like a we're so back, because like honestly, 3 years ago to even talk about CTV was like, you're just, you know, a spook, or you're just trying to kill Bitcoin, where you're going to create FedCoin. And people had really advanced theories on how a covenant would destroy how Bitcoin works without understanding how Bitcoin works. Like they didn't understand very elementary concepts. And I feel like a lot of the discussion now kind of raises the discourse for a more interesting conversation. You know, with Rusty putting out the great script restoration, people thinking and designing things through like opcats now activated on Signet. The first thing Anthony Towns did, who runs one of like the Signet network, like the test network for Bitcoin, was like, oh, we can do a proof of work faucet for Signet coins. I've been building in Bitcoin now, like Bitcoin products now for like 3 years. I can't get Signet coins. I have like 2 million Signet sats, and they're like my most prized possession. And I like ask people for them, and no one has them. But now we can actually do a faucet. That's unrelated developer side. But anyway, like it's been interesting. People are thinking about like the new design space of what Bitcoin can be. And I feel like a little bit of this like inevitability that was maybe a different cultural era of Bitcoin has people realizing like we should be evaluating how to build better systems. And that's what honestly I'm most excited about.
Wait, is it Jameson Lop? Is it Signet he's like screwing with?
That's testnet. So that's testnet 3. Which is its own hilarious rabbit hole. Jameson has been totally poning the testnet 3 network with doing a time warp attack. Without getting into the details, he's fuzzing those timestamps I was talking about, the miners put into the Bitcoin block. And he is just like running, he is the testnet network now, which has been really funny. So testnet, I think they're coming out with testnet 4. It's going back and forth in the pull requests and the mailing list and on GitHub. People are just thinking about new ways of designing and building things. And I think it's just an exciting time to let people put forward good ideas and kind of get these discussions going. I really learned a lot this year, just understanding mechanically how Bitcoin transactions work and how the network works. It's been really great.
I want to go back to something you said a little while ago regarding like a lot of these scaling solutions are going to be VC funded and like they'll have the money. Like, how do you feel about that coming into Bitcoin? Like, do you have, like you said, you're VC funded. I would venture to say it's maybe slightly different than the VC funding of some of these L2s right now, right? Like, especially if they're going to end up kind of having tokens and whatnot, like it's just probably a different model.
Sure.
So like, what are your like, just, I don't know, personal beliefs on this?
I mean, my personal beliefs, like I'm a free market capitalist. Like I was a anarcho-capitalist libertarian guy going into this. And honestly, if Bitcoin dies because a couple venture capitalists put money into companies, then Bitcoin never really deserved to win anyway. Like Bitcoin is for enemies. This was a whole big thing during the whole ordinals, like derangement syndrome era of this whole, like they're ruining the Bitcoin network. And I was like, Bitcoin's for enemies. And that's what I came into Bitcoin. Bitcoin was about like, people are going to do things you don't like with their money and you can't stop them. And people just like, got really weird. I'm trying to think of a nice way of saying it. They got derangement syndrome, basically, right? And they orientated their entire understanding of Bitcoin around ordinals as opposed to like this anarchic system. And the really beautiful thing about Bitcoin is that it's rules, not rulers. And it's all about Bitcoin consensus. And if you can do something within consensus, you're playing within the rules we all agreed to, and go for it. I think like for me, like I've never like speculated around in like venture-backed token. Like I never like really played in that. I don't have token warrants at my company. I'm a boomer layer 1 Bitcoin company, so there are no tokens to be had. People are going to do what they're going to do. And I don't think that that should necessarily be a reason why like entire segments of how Bitcoin development like or like upgrades or like ways to execute products should be just verboten because someone can attach a token to it. Like I mentioned earlier, Taproot Assets allows for native asset issuance as well as RGB, right? There's Bitcoin native companies that are working on ways to do asset issuance. So for me, maybe it gets a lot of like, rightfully so, from the 2017 ICO era. Like Casey literally invented runes to do meme coins. Like people are going to be doing tokens and silly stuff. For me, like I also view it as like a lot of this stuff is open source. So like, you know, you put a lot of development and like honestly, like the zero knowledge proof ecosystem and the ability to think about this new design space of how, you know, blockchains can operate came from a lot of venture-backed funding, or whether the Ethereum Foundation or whoever else. Like there are positive things that can come from investing in an ecosystem, and I'm totally cool with it. I call that out specifically in the context of if you have like 10 of these and they're all trying to get into the next block, like they are going to pay through the nose to make sure they get into that next block, and it's going to congest the network. I tell people, if you thought ordinals and runes were bad, wait until rollups are coming on chain, because each of those transactions, it's like one transaction, it's like a couple hundred like bytes, like massive rollup proofs getting stamped onto chain, like whole different game for sure.
Yeah, it'll be a new market for block space. But I do want to ask then, like, what is your opinion as to why, like, we see a lot of these new rollups coming online, and like we have tried this, like for what it's worth, right? I don't say that so critically, right? Because I do think there is like a reinvigorated spirit in Bitcoin. Like it's undeniable, right? But I always try to be like somewhat tempered myself. Not that like I have like influence or anything, but just like in terms of trying to understand this stuff, I'm looking at this. I'm like, okay, we have had rootstock. We've had stacks, right? Like I just wonder why maybe people think this time is different in terms of what people want to do with their Bitcoin. Now, I will qualify this for 1 second and say that I talked to some of these people who go to Asia, and they say these people love yeeting into multi-sigs. And you can go and look and verify that they are yeeting into multi-sigs. But you know how these things ultimately go. And I'm not even saying they're going to scam people. I'm just saying people eventually withdraw their money once like the incentives or whatever are dried up. So I just wonder, like, you see a lot of these teams who have like very smart people working on them, and they seem like more professional. They seem like they probably have more money than these projects before. But I also sit here, I'm like, okay, like we've tried these things. Like, why is this time different? And you're like, what is your opinion on this, right? Like with these rollups.
Very concisely, I could say it's all going to happen again. And I had this post about, I'm not going to go try and find it right now, but something to the effect of like, if you thought it was hilarious that every single time an ETH multisig got hacked for hundreds of millions of dollars about how dumb Ethereum was, just give it like some time. It's going to be happening on Bitcoin soon. No, I don't think any of that's going to change. And this is where like, maybe I turn more of like a hard-nosed Bitcoin maximalist and be like, I don't tell people to put money in this stuff. I don't tell people to go run around with it. I tell everyone that like anything you put in there, assume it's going to go to zero. Like it's heavy risk. Like sure, you could bank something and like get like 100x, but like you're going into a thieves' den and you're going to get knifed in the back. And that's technology agnostic from the sense that like people can build and do cool things. And that's kind of like on my libertarian side, I'm like, yeah, people should be able to go build, do whatever they want. I'm not going to tell people to put stuff in here and start eating into random coins because it's going to be rough. There's no divine reason of why being on the Bitcoin blockchain all of a sudden makes it not a precarious project. Like, and to be charitable, I'm not going to say everything's a scam because I think that's not a helpful framing because you almost exit your voice from the conversation because there's no nuance. And like I actually think the best framing of this is Michael Goldstein's from the Nakamoto Institute. Everyone is a scammer. Because everyone wants your Bitcoin. So like everyone's going to try and like, it could be like a fair economic trade. Like I may want to sell you my hack here, right? And like, I'm scamming you because I'm going to get my Bitcoin, your Bitcoin, right? I'm the scammer, right? And I think that's like the most helpful way to kind of like distill the concept that everyone's just trying to get your Bitcoin. And that's like totally agnostic to like whatever vehicle or means, whatever you're doing it. It's all going to happen again. There's no reason why it wouldn't happen again. This is where like there's a different discussion between like X company evaluating Y rollup versus like Bitcoin the protocol and like scaling and like how users can interact with each other and like do different things. There's a different conversation from like X rollup with Y token promising Z feature. There's no reason why it wouldn't happen all over again. Maybe the same exact mistakes won't happen again, but a lot of stuff's going to go sideways, right? And there's no reason like to think that it would be any other way.
I definitely agree. And like for how kind of like trolly and I don't know, maybe critical I am, like I generally am of the opinion that I agree. Like calling everything a scam is it detracts from like any kind of any contribution you can really make. But I think that where I differ, at least in my personal views, is like it's not a scam, but what I would say is like we can also say like that's not innovation, or we already have that, right? Like, and so this is where maybe the line to me, it's like, okay, whatever, do whatever. There's going to be degens who are going to ape into this stuff, and like it happens everywhere. I'm one of these degens, by the way, who apes the stuff elsewhere. So like I can't like, I'm not casting stones by any means, but I'm also not sitting here and saying like this is wildly innovative, right? I think maybe that's where there is like more of a nuanced conversation. It's like you can do that, but don't say that this is a groundbreaking discovery, right? And also there is a little bit of like, especially within maybe crypto, there's a little bit, and I've like voiced my opinion too many times about this, right? But like it's not necessarily that you can't go and build these L2s or build these products, but like you have to understand that if you build something and it launches at like $2 billion valuation, like you should be prepared for people to say like, look, is what you just built worth $2 billion, right? Or is this a dysfunctional market? And like, I very much lean toward, we have not seen an efficient market in crypto. It's all been an aberration. Like it has all existed in a period of irrational exuberance. So for us to say this is innovative, it's like, well, actually, we don't know if this is innovative, right? We have no idea.
Efficient markets have never been tried.
No. seriously. Well, also like,
well,
and like the irony in this, and like, I'm not trying to be too critical, obviously, because like I don't take this stuff too seriously. I'm not actually like offended by it, but even the products that people point to as having product market fit typically exist to further the proliferation of other products, of which we don't know if they have product market fit. Like most of the sustainable protocols elsewhere, right? That people will say, oh, like, look at the product market fit here. It's like, well, actually, they're using this to swap, like they're selling the picks and shovels, but we don't know if there's gold, right? Like this is it. Yeah. You can keep printing tokens and keep this going, but like there's no evidence to me that like this actually works in a functional capital market. It works in crypto where like you can spin up your tokens incessantly, but it's weird.
This is amazing. Yeah, no, this whole conversation right here actually reminded me of what the innovation is with all of these projects on Bitcoin, and that Bitcoin is the king of liquidity, as the best money. It's just the best money, and when you start to realize that you can do Ponzi's on Bitcoin, why do you need Ethereum anymore? Right? That's like my hyper cynical take of like, if ultimately the whole piece, like, so let's go way back in the time machine here. 2013, 2014, when I first started getting into Bitcoin, all of the random exchanges paired all of their altcoins, which were fork coins mostly. They would just take the Bitcoin code and they would fork.
Right, like Feathercoin. Yeah.
Aurora coin. Like there's a whole list of Dogecoin. Like they're all in there.
Litecoin, yeah.
They were all BTC pairs.
Right.
BTC was the king of crypto liquidity, and everything happened there. Stablecoins, I said, like, have the utility because people just want to get paid in cash on Tron, whatever, like nothing against them. But then all of the random assets started getting paired against that, which I think goes to your point about like stables, massive use case. What's their massive use case? Buying meme coins. Like there's obviously a market of people who like, if you're in Argentina, you use Tether on Tron to like pay bills and like do cash transactions. But a lot of that liquidity is tied up in random crap as the other side of an AMM pair, right? So even if you point to stables as like an obvious use case, one of their very obvious use cases is being the base pair trade against everything. So some of the innovation is you get to go to Bitcoin. I think this is something that like whatever your independent opinion is of like the Taproot Wizards was like, crypto's a shit show, clown show. Let's just bring it all to Bitcoin. It's the king anyway. And we can do all that stuff here too, right? And like, I think ultimately like that is a meaningful change in just the progress of Bitcoin as money, because Bitcoin being for enemies, people are going to do scams and bad things. I view myself as an actor being like, hey, don't put your money in there. Put in when you're willing to lose. Don't put your life savings into this. Don't put a meaningful amount of money that you're not willing to risk it all for. That is a lot of the innovation ultimately, is that Bitcoin is the king asset. And I think we're kind of round tripping. We went to ETH for a while, then stablecoins, and we're kind of just pulling ourselves back to assets that are just on top of Bitcoin. Because everyone wants Bitcoin at the end of the day. And that would actually be like my cynical yet Bitcoin maximalist take is obviously it was all going to come back to Bitcoin because Bitcoin's the best money in the world. And independent of any moral judgments of how I feel that it's going to happen, it's an inevitable thing in an anarchic system that these things are going to be popping up. Because it's how it started before the rest of the ecosystem in crypto developed. It was all on Bitcoin. It's all just coming back home.
I mean, is your theory then that these other chains just die out? See, I think that applications, like whether or not I find them personally to be like 0 to 1 unlocks, that doesn't matter. What I think is feasible is that these applications come back to Bitcoin in some capacity, right? Like something like Aave. I'm not sure about Aave's pool model, but like something like Aave, like there's a place for that in some Bitcoin adjacent or whatever. If
there's definitely
so like
there's definitely a place for that.
But then I do wonder, like, putting on your maxi hat, like, do you think the rest of the stuff just disappears?
No, I don't think it goes to full zero, right? I just see, like, if you're going to pull a metric like Bitcoin dominance, will just make us steadily climb upward. I haven't even looked at a Bitcoin dominance chart in a long time. I'm trying to pull one up right now, but like
it's over 50%. I know that.
Yeah. So like, here's the thing about the Bitcoin dominance. Like, we're at 54% right now, and that's up 6% over the past year. The thing about the Bitcoin dominance chart is that it's Bitcoin versus the world, and someone's always spinning up a new token to lock up a bunch of liquidity and get a run up market cap. Whereas Bitcoin's market cap are a bunch of boomers smash buying via their IRAs and 401ks and the S&P 5, like you just have people that are just like plowing into ETFs, right? All of those inflows into ETFs, they're obviously like Solana ETF, like S1 was announced, whatever, and like it's going to come with other things too. But Bitcoin has ensconced itself in this narrative that traditional safe money, like if they're just willing to dip their toes into crypto, they're going to just buy Bitcoin, right? So you just have this constant market bid of people going into ETFs. And it's just a larger capital base. And I put Bitcoin's actual market cap as being much more reliable with deep liquidity compared to any random token project that's going against it in that it looks like 45% split. And so I think it's just going to keep on marching upwards. Like ultimately that's how I view it. I don't think it goes to zero. I think there may be another cycle where some other new thing comes up again and it becomes the new hot thing that everyone's building on. And over time that gets pulled over to Bitcoin. Maybe those cycles shorten. If Bitcoin has an upgrade that allows this kind of stuff to be more natively executed on within Bitcoin, maybe like the development cycles are a lot shorter, right? Because I think a lot of the narrative around Bitcoin and thinking about other ways we can upgrade and change it is that it's eating ETH's lunch is what it's doing. That's what Ordinals did with NFTs, right? The moment there was an NFT market that could happen, like, and you're more than welcome to fact check me on this as someone who's like the Bitcoin boomer maxi here with my bunker coin. But like my observation was like, oh wow, like you made an ability to do it on Bitcoin. And maybe the cynical take is, well, yeah, because this was the new casino, so you want to be early into that casino so you can make the most returns on it. But once you can do it on Bitcoin, it like empirically, if you're just like thinking about NFTs like as an art object, it is better on Bitcoin. And Casey very clearly laid out that thesis that the asset is literally on chain. It's not an AWS pointer in a JSON somewhere that can go down or using IPFS. Like it is really on chain. And from a permanent standpoint, that was a very aesthetically pleasing to people that are into digital art and makes a lot more sense. You know? So
yeah. I think that like some of the Ethereum NFTs will like have staying power. I'm actually like NFTs are something that I was kind of convinced on. Like I don't know if any of the current NFTs, but like long run, I definitely think NFTs have staying power. I would say one other thing though, like in terms of like going the rest of the stuff going to zero, like I do think that going back to stablecoins and like how I mentioned, like I just don't think that it matters that much, the like level of nation state resistance for transferring around USDC.
Yeah.
No, in reality, but like I actually kind of like talking to ironically a Bitcoin maxi, like pretty adamant Bitcoin maxi, and he's using like Solana on the back end of his product. And basically what he's saying is like the nice part about, so it's like a DLC lending platform where like you can like deposit Bitcoin and borrow on Solana. And his point in which like kind of, and I saw that I hadn't thought about this, but like he really, as somebody who's building, he like kind of ingrained this in my mind is like some of these chains like Solana, like just think about it as they take away the necessity for like compliance because it's distributed, so you don't have to do what Stripe does in the background. And then they take away all of the infrastructure that, right? I mean, of course, like what I'm saying is Rhaegar. Okay, like yes,
I love it. No. I'm loving it. No, this is great. This is. I think. Yeah, this is all good.
Yeah, when he said it like that, I was like, you know what, you're right. And one thing that I'm 100% certain about is the U.S. will attempt to extend the dollar hegemony for as long as possible. And one of the most obvious ways to do this right now, as you said, is with stable coins. These are the only people who want, or sort of are required, but who want to own treasuries anymore. China doesn't want our treasuries anymore. You know what I mean? Stable coins are so very obviously the next, like, how can we proliferate this like monetary colonialism more? Okay, we start letting every single stablecoin come to market. And then you look at something like Solana, which is great for sending around stablecoins. Is it like, I don't know about the level of decentralization. I mean, I think that Solana is I think Solana has a good shot at being a very good chain for USDC. And if Circle gets a whatever Wells notice or whatever it is that Circle would get from a three-letter agency, they'll just blacklist your account. Like, and that's always going to be the trust bottle, sort of. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No. I was laughing only because just I like it basically like I love the GIF. The secret ingredient is crime. Have you ever seen that guy?
Yeah, of
He's
course.
Like,
it's everything in crypto.
Yeah. It's so you're like, oh, like it's just so great because it's instant and there's no compliance. Like I just like, well, yeah, obviously,
Right.
I think it's a very reasonable take. Just like a lot of this stuff has just been around, like the way people execute the larger crypto ecosystem is like, I just launch a chain and it works and no one's in control. So like a caveat emptor. I think that I can understand why it removes friction in a lot of places, right? Solana, like Maxie's, like, and myself included, will like make jokes about how Solana went down, but like when it isn't down, which is like a big problem for a blockchain, but like Bitcoin's has only had 2 downtimes in the past like 14 years, right? So like the going down is a really big deal. It happens regularly in Solana, but like people are happy using it and they get what they want out of it, right? And so it can remove a lot of friction for a lot of people, and I think people are welcome to do that. Like I'm going to sit with my Boomer coin, maybe with the luxury of not having to worry about fast final settlement of US dollar payments or meme coins. But for me, I'm not looking for that stuff. I think that I don't think it all goes to zero, to be clear. I think just more of it goes to Bitcoin, and the go-to narrative of Bitcoin doesn't do that is like kind of like the wind gets taken out of that sail a bit.
Yeah. I think the other thing with Bitcoin too, like, and I'm just saying this, I mean, obviously I have my biases, but like, I'm just saying this very, very objectively. Like there's one coin that people divert billions of real resources that can be used to run useless LLMs and heat homes, although it's not really that same energy, but like they are having like a real opportunity cost in mining Bitcoin. And like, this is, you get castigated for this type of thing. Oh, like it's a laser eye max, like proof of work take, but it's like, there is one chain that has the overwhelming, like dominant market share in doing that. And then there is a new chain popping up every single day elsewhere because it is costless to replicate. And like, you can just look at the divergence of these two and say like, okay, you can understand why I may like think this is very, very scarce block space, and look at this and say, I enjoy using it myself. Like I'm a bit of a DJ and I enjoy using this block space, but like it can be very, very easily replicated. You know what I mean? It's open source.
Right. And it's the billion. I was talking about the ETF buyers plowing billions of dollars into it, but you're right. Just to continue the network, there's billions of dollars going around that Bitcoin's using. And this is always like one of the fun things if you go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole is how Bitcoin helps energy markets just operate, because they are like, it's manifestly true. Like look at ERCOT, like the amount, like the billions of dollars that like, of grid infrastructure there that's being plugged in for Bitcoin mining, because they can do things like they just shut off for grounding, for demand response. It's one of these things that just objectively, wow, from a not product market fit of like crypto as an application, but like Bitcoin as a system with the real world product market fit, demand response, and being able to stabilize grids. Like that's not a laser-eyed narrative. Like they get paid, like this is the brilliance of it. They get paid to turn off their ASICs.
Right.
Right.
They have
like
power
imagine
purchase agreements. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, that's just an incredible, like objective, like value being shown in the world. And I think with the AI stuff, you're right. Like LLMs are going to start towing in a little bit. There's differences though with like the latency, because like Bitcoin give you that block template, but like, you're right though. They're going to start encroaching on each other a bit as with NVIDIA being the top market cap company in the world, right? Like obviously like it's going to keep on growing in, but
well, I think like maybe more, I wasn't like saying like so specifically in the weeds there, but maybe more if you just like zoom way out and you think about like, okay, what are the 2 most valuable commodities? Like I say commodities, okay, there's more that goes into a chip than like silicon, but like hardware in some capacity, right? Computers, compute, and then energy. Like this is what like society reduces down to functionally, right? And so like it is a real like decision. And this is why like I often troll about like, block space elsewhere, it's fine. Like I think all of this stuff will reduce down to its commodity cost, which is 0, because it's open source software that can be run on a server and people seem to be okay running. Like,
I love that you said that, because this is actually one of my takes I've been saying for a while, is the problem with a lot of intersections between Bitcoin and like venture and business development is that open source software over time naturally commoditizes to 0. So if everything is open source, and everyone is like, it's all just sitting there. There is no sweet like magic sauce, so to speak. And it's all just sitting there as open source code. And the copy paste code is like the cost to copy paste, the friction's massively pulled down. You can't actually accrue value because it's all just open and someone else can spin up another chain, to your point. And as just a very brief tangent, I've been this concept of you can't open source capital. So if you have $1, the dollar has to be doing something. You can't just copy and paste the dollar. That's been the whole innovation like with Bitcoin. And that's how I actually view it with the insurance context, is that like that dollar is going to work to be a reserve pool for insurance payouts. Okay. And so, so that's actually from us, like, yeah, we're building a bunch of open source tech, but like the insurance market side of the fence, you can't open source that, right? Sure, you can open source a wallet, you can open source like Miniscript and tech and the how you secure the Bitcoin, but you necessarily like the underlying protocol stuff should be open source. It needs to be open source, but that doesn't mean that everything's open source, right? Yeah, I think that's just an interesting observation you had about just open sourcing capital and everything, marginal cost going to zero. That's a problem I just see with the larger crypto ecosystem, because the marginal cost of the next meme coin is zero. I know enough about crypto about pump.fun. It's like it's awesome. Just like I bet it is.
The other thing, like the more sort of, if you're kind of putting on your kind of like skeptical glasses here, is that then what happens as a function of this with these applications is that they have to build moats, and like moats it's not exactly I think what we are trying to do, right? Like they now build moats, be it through the front end or something like this, like liquidity providers, like take an AMM, like they have some deal with like deep liquidity providers. Now you're just recreating a system where it's gated off, right? And maybe it's permissionless, and maybe it's much easier to access. And like, I will concede, like these are step function improvements, right? Like maybe we'll see. I don't know if it's been a blockchain, but we'll see. But like, I just don't know when you're building, like, so now what? It's all open source, and how are you going to build a moat? Well, you build a moat by like doing a lot of what we are trying to get away from, in my opinion, right?
It's explicitly bad customer experience, user experience, and like predatory to customers, but to build those moats, right? Because at some point you need to collect your value and your margin. You need to find a reason for someone to buy the next round of your token unlocks, right? You need something there, as opposed to it just being like full market dumps. That's I'd love to just ask you this. Like, I saw this post, maybe it was like a day ago, about the July token unlocks for all of these projects for the past year. And so like they do these like X year vests, and like they just unlock in like, it's like some of them are like double digit supplies of these tokens that are just going to get mass dumped into no bid, right? Like the game, that's how I view it, as like my horn-rimmed like Bitcoin maxi sense of like, we have a token unlock every 10 minutes in Bitcoin, and it's a whole global lottery of billions of dollars of infrastructure to try and find it, compared to like this token warrant releases and expires on this date.
Yeah, I saw this same post. I mean, everybody says don't say that this time is different, but ironically, all right, this is kind of funny. You're going to laugh at who I'm about to cite. This is like putting on my absolute laser eyes. Brad Mills, I think, went on Stefan Livera's podcast maybe like a couple years ago, like maybe right when the bear market started. And he was like, retail is wisening up. And I'm like, come on now. Like, retail's not wisening up. But I will tell you, this cycle, meme coins have been fantastic, because they're what people have realized. And like, I mean, this has been sort of like beat a dead horse, but like now we could wrap this into Bitcoin, because I'm talking with a Bitcoiner. When people realize that it is literally costless to spin up a meme coin every 30 seconds and launch them on AMM, they start to get in, they start to have this like journey of the subjective theory of value. And they start thinking, wait a second, why is this worth like less than Aave token? Like, I'm not being critical, but people start to go down this journey, and they realize, wait a second, like what is the token? And this is why I'm cautiously optimistic about retail this cycle, is because I think people are like, oh my God, like that Bitcoin cost $59,500 to mine, and this token over here cost $0 to launch on pump.fun. Like, I think I want to store my money in the thing that costs almost as much as the price, right? Like, this is my theory. And when you're talking about these like token unlocks, like, I think it could get bad. Like this cycle, I mean, I'm serious. Like, this is why I'm saying, like, I don't want to be the guy who's like, oh, this cycle, this time's different. But like, it really seems like there's no natural buyer of these like obscene amounts of tokens getting absolutely dumped into like no bid, right?
No bid. I'm laughing because I've never touched this shit, right? So I'm like, what did you think was going to happen, right? I had a tweet talking about this where I said, I'm enjoying the new crypto projects are having a hard time finding retail adoption because as shit as they are, meme coins are at least egalitarian and that you no longer need a big tech roadmap or a pre-mined token to get and give it to investors, founders, and advisors. It's like obviously true. Sure. Like you literally just like hit the button, rip it, LOL, like Pepe, whatever, right? Like you're just like, it's cargo culting, just like Ponzi's. And we've removed the tech roadmaps and all of the stuff around it to be like, this is why it's a den of thieves. It is a Ponzi. Like you're all just dumping on each other, knives in the back. And what's actually endearing about the meme coins is that they're just very upfront, honest about it. Like there is no promise of utility. Yeah. Like there is no roadmap. There is no like revenue, cash flow. Sorry, it's a Ponzi. And you can buy it.
I think,
and if you want to go to the high leverage casino, go for it. Like you can do that.
Yeah, I think also, I think that ironically, these tokens that have, like I was talking about product market fit earlier, right? Like we don't really know what exactly has product market fit yet, but there are some protocols that have tokens, and these protocols do consistent volume. They have value locked in. They haven't been hacked in over 3 years, so they're deemed, viable. And like the irony with the tokens from these protocols is like they need the government to tell them that it's okay to share revenue with the holders. So it's like we're all sitting around here waiting, and maybe there is like we'll see how this plays out, right? Like maybe there is a natural buyer of X, like some AMM's token if it's generating like decent margins, but you're waiting for the government to tell you that it's okay to own this and give out like, share a dividend or whatever. And it's like, what are we doing here? Come on.
Yeah, that would actually be a critique I would have on Bitcoin culture. I'm not saying this is everyone, but there was this large cohort that thought that Bitcoin was preordained to be the only government daddy blessed asset. And they're like, well, ETH was never going to get an ETF because like it's security. And this idea that I believe Bitcoin is the best money independent of what the government thinks about it. And that's actually why it's the best money. It's because I don't have to care about the government's opinion on it. And there was an interesting cultural segment for a while that was just like Bitcoin preordained, pumping it off. But like, honestly, like I would look to someone like a Bruce Fenton that's just like, he's a securities broker. He's just like, let people do what the fuck they want, right? Openly disclose it, let them do it. And like, why shouldn't someone be able to do that? Like, just from a pure moral, ethical, like role of government perspective, right? Like, it doesn't make sense to me. It's very obvious that like the government is, especially this current administration, where, I mean, as we're recording right now, who knows that Biden is just going to like quit any minute now. So maybe there'll be a new administration by the end of the episode. But like, they're very obviously hostile to this, to prevent this stuff. And it's hard if you're trying to build a project in good faith and trying to figure out how can I do all this stuff when you just have a moving target. And I think if I were to try and concoct some token project that in my best good faith effort was try to do everything possible to try and like serve a valued customers and token holders, would be banning the United States from participating in it. Like that, that would just be like that. That's really and not just be like, oh, if you come from a US IP, but like really stringently locking that down. But admittedly, that's where a lot of liquidity is, right? So everyone wants to play in a gray area. But like, I can't envy someone trying to build something with this regulatory regime. I'm in a super boomer compliant regulatory space of insurance, and I have clear like rails and understand what I need to do. I don't envy someone trying to be an entrepreneur in the larger crypto ecosystem, trying to navigate the what's it called? The Rorschach test of whatever the government feels that day is like a rule break.
Well, it's definitely like this like a draconian regime, and it's cherry picked, and I definitely agree. And I'm 100% on board with letting people do what they want. I guess the one thing I would say is that like I'm going to try to say this like somewhat cautiously. Like I haven't seen a token designed, nor do I know if one can exist, that I wouldn't ultimately want the state to enforce the rules behind it. Like, so this is kind of the irony, right? Like, and I think that people have these notions of like DAOs, and like the problem too is like crypto, I don't think it's done itself a good service in like showing what is feasible. Like what we have is VCs who own 40% of the supply, and if they don't like something, they just veto it in these DAOs. And so this whole premise of like distributed governance and like what is possible with like this new era, right? It's like, actually, I think I'd like the government to tell me who owns the coins, like, or if there's, I mean, I guess hedge funds have like, reporting, like quarterly reporting rules or whatever. But I guess it's just like, there's no example really to me where it's like, oh, this is completely outside of human control, and I can rely on code to distribute like some type of earnings or whatever. It's like, this is never the case. There's always this DAO, there's always this token. So I don't know. I mean, I definitely agree. Like we need, I hate saying this, but we need regulatory clarity around this. But like, let's not pretend that these things like shouldn't have some, I mean, unless it's like literally a hard-coded AGI enforcing the rules from the beginning, right? Unless it's that, like, I want investor protections if I'm pretending it's a real project, right? Like, I'm not talking about meme coins right now. I'm talking about, like, if there's a real project, like, I want to know that they can't just, like, abscond with the Dow Treasury and buy a yacht and a house at, like, Mallorca. Like, I think this is a reasonable thing for me to ask if there's people who can, like, run off from multi-sig, right?
Totally. I guess my baseline would be caveat emptor, take on your own risk, right? Buyer beware. If this stuff is like proxy securities, it's like, okay, then like let people issue stock. Like I had to, when I formed my company, make a C Corp and issue shares. Like you can have a digital analog bridge to that kind of mechanism, and then like let people do what they're going to do.
Yeah, I
like,
want to ask you.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, this is an interesting question. And I don't want to take up too much of your time. I got one more question after this. But, okay.
Yeah.
You started AnchorWatch. You started a real business. I assume it's a genuine LLC. I don't know where it's located, probably Delaware.
It's a Delaware C Corp.
Yes. Okay. So would you have been interested in launching your business on an AMM if you could have? Like, would you have been interested? Would that have been a big unlock for you? Like this idea of permissionless capital formation? Because my theory is that like most founders are actually like hodlers. They like want to own as much of their company as they can, and they want to drive the direction of that and have as much control as possible. And of course, people take external funding. Everybody takes VC funding. There's no like, this is a natural like market, this is something everybody does. But I'm just curious, like how big of an unlock would it be for you to issue like AnchorWatch equity on a permissionless like market making mechanism?
So conceptually, it would have been like, just as a general idea, I think it wouldn't be like where I'd go for first funding, right? You'd have your friends and family angel equivalent, because like I don't need token holders when like I'm trying to look for advice and guidance. I'm not expecting whoever bought a bag of my coin to like have meaningful insights for me. I think for just general, like as you're raising more and you can kind of like show milestones and progress, I personally, as like an abstract concept, like, not strictly opposed to that. My concerns would be, one, making sure that I'm not like just dumping the top on people that are buying tokens, right? Two would be an understanding of like investor disclosures and like information that would be shared. Like that's kind of like a murky water, since the shares can transfer to whoever they want to. Yeah, like I'm, as a concept for like capital formation, like I'm totally open to that. Like in the pure like anarcho-capitalist, like go like raise your money how you want. I don't think I definitely wouldn't have done it, and I would not have done it up to this point. Like we did our seed round last year, right? Like as I'm thinking through it, like for me, I think it'd be a really I mean, it's a character test that you get a lot of token founders who just like dump their project on people who buy the token. I don't think I would fail that in the sense of like, I'm very buckled in and I'm very invested in owning as much equity of my own company as possible. I love the idea though of being able, because I have like friends and family who are like, oh, I want to invest. I'm like, well, you're not an accredited investor. I have to do a Reg D sale. Like, and it gets like super cumbersome, and like there'd be cool, like there's Reg CF to do crowdfunding ways of doing it. And I think there should be liquidity for secondary shares in general for companies. Like early stage venture, like there isn't a lot of liquidity. That was the innovation of tokens, was fast time to liquidity. If we're just being blunt, but that was the innovation.
100%. But like the other side of this, and just putting away your anarcho capitalists, because I'm agree with you. Like I generally like I've said, let people do what they want, but there is something, once again, like there's something a bit inefficient about a market whereby like you have, well, sometimes very deep liquidity as a founder without really having done anything yet. Like this is a bizarre concept. Fundamentally, this is a bizarre concept. Like there is no evidence of a sustainable business or product market fit, and you can sell $100 million worth of equity. Wait a second.
This is what I meant by the character test, right?
Yeah, of course.
Like, I could, right? Like I could. I would not. I can understand that's why a lot of projects, like all of a sudden they rip 100 million market cap and they have a website and a white paper that doesn't actually have any computation on it. It's just a marketing sheet, and they're able to jump, right? Like, there's a very good, like, and this is where you look at it, like there's a reason why this stuff hasn't been as easy to access for general investors. And I think that is largely the problem. You know what I mean?
Right? And
like
also, that is like, and also, like, people try to compare like venture in the real world with venture in crypto. And the thing is, like, if you're a seed investor in venture in the real world, like most of the time you are exiting to like somebody else who is an accredited investor, and it's because you've been able to exit as a result of the business doing well. You're either like exiting in Series A or B or whatever, or they're IPOing. And the reason is because the company has grown and shown product market fit, right? And like, so, I mean, I have reservations about this, obviously, like, once again, not trying to change anything, but you look at this and it's like, this is not exiting because you're exiting a lot of times to people who are also really smart. Like Excel is exiting to like A16Z in Series B or whatever, and A16Z is a bunch of really smart people. I'm talking in the real world right now, not their crypto thing, but they're a bunch of really smart people who have determined like this has massive growth potential or something. I'm throwing out random examples, but like you get the idea. And it's not
but as someone who went the boomer path and didn't launch a token and made a Delaware C Corp and issued shares, got some angel investment, chewed glass for a year, raised a seed round like 18 months like later, like after the angel round, like, and really just jumped in with 2 feet. Like, you see these headlines of random token project that existed 3 weeks ago, all of a sudden like big like founder bag exit, and it makes me feel sick. Because I view my investors like with a very serious fiduciary responsibility of, I put myself through a lot of hard work every day because you took a shot on me and I want us to win together. And the idea that you'd have this asymmetry where a founder could just go walk off with their bag, like it's not, this goes maybe into like the moral matrix of why I'm a maximalist. Because like one sense is like, it's anarcho-capitalist, just get the bag. But like I morally as a person find that like repugnant. And they're like, and maybe even my investors get like a 10x or 100x on the bag, but then like who are the people I'm dumping on, right? Like I went explicitly did a boomer TradFi based company around Bitcoin, layering in Bitcoin smart contracts and whatnot, because I wanted to create value in the world. I wanted to challenge myself. I very easily could have gotten a job in Bitcoin and hang out, and like I'm putting myself through this gauntlet of trying to build a company because I want to deliver that value, not just to my shareholders, but to the overall ecosystem. Because this is a really weird thing. Like, I'm a weird person. I think the idea of insurance intersecting with Bitcoin custody makes perfect sense, and it's super sexy and fun in my like autistic brain, right? Like for me, like that, I'm like, let me go and try and work on this really hard problem no one's really tried tackling before, because I think it's meaningful. And as Bitcoin continues to mature as an asset, insurance is naturally going to be a capital market that develops. And it's not a capital market of an AMM of a pump and dump meme coin. Like, very meaningfully, that people are going to want to transfer risk away from the fact that they have access to an asset, that they want to make sure that if shit goes south, they can get identified. It's foundational to just commerce. Like, insurance is like this thing that like built the American founding, right? Like, all of those explorers and spice ships were ultimately done out of a coffee shop in London called Lloyd's, that has now become Lloyd's of London, the insurance capital of the world, because risk transference, it is like the oil to the gears of capitalism. The idea that if I'm a small business and if my house burns, like my business burns down, I'm like out, like, and I'm just out of the game of capitalism, like it just sucks, right? And then I do this idea with custody and Bitcoin. If you're going to use counterparties, risk transference is very obviously the next stage evolution in how people are going to want to manage and safeguard this asset, because you can't mitigate counterparty risk. You can transfer the counterparty risk. So that's the whole point of an insurance contract, right? So like, it's funny. I get like really tuned up and impassioned about insurance, but like, that's why I built a company. That's why I didn't do a token. That's why, like, it's very easily like all of my knowledge of how Bitcoin script and stuff works. Like, I was like messing around with like chatting with Casey, like right after Ordinals. It's like, there's 10,000 token rune adjacent, like things I could have started building. And as a Bitcoin developer who's built a full end-to-end Bitcoin wallet, doing all of the nuts and bolts of all these custom smart contracts, I have the mercenary skill set if I wanted to go do a token. I choose not to do that because for me personally, I don't find that meaningful. And me trying to build something is where I derive my meaning and value. And that's where like this whole like token secondary, like dumping on people, like caveat emptor, but also I personally do find it like a morally just like, ugh, like I don't want to touch that. I don't find it meaningfully rewarding for myself.
Do any vectors of centralization worry you just personally right now? Like mining pools that have come up recently. Do you have any thoughts?
Mining pools massively. So I was talking with people that were very knowledgeable about Bitcoin. Like I'm speaking of Vake on purpose, who basically had this theory that like, you know, actually Antpool is like over half the hash rate at this point. And I was actually at Bitcoin Asia and chatting with people, and that was basically confirmed. And I think
want to hear something. Wait, I'm going to tell you something hilarious. You're going to laugh at this. The like over not a year ago, but yeah, like between 6 months and a year ago. You know who told me about this first? Post Capone, Schizo.
Love that man.
Looking through the mempool, and he was like, "Hey, check this out. I think this could be a big story." And I was like, can you just tell me what you're talking about? Because I cannot read block explorers and I refuse to go through all these transactions, and I refuse to like figure out all these tagged wallets. Like, just tell me what's going on. And he was like, I think that all of this is running through like Antpool proxies. And I was like, all right, interesting. And sure enough, like 2 or 3 months later, it actually kind of came out, right? And I was like, Post, you are an absolute schizo.
First off, Post Capone, absolutely a must follow on Twitter. Like, great guy. I got to have beers with him and Shinobi at PubKey.
That sounds
Shinobi
fun.
cannot handle his liquor at all. Just as a side note, unrelated to everything. But amazing dude, super whip smart, understands this whole ecosystem.
Yeah,
like, very well. Like he's like schizo milady guy, but like he knows his fucking shit. So love Post. I actually learned about this in 2023. In January of 2023, I was at Satoshi Roundtable. And Chatham House Rules, I won't say who said it, but someone said that. And I came back and I was like, have you anyone heard about it? I told like my buddies and I was like, oh, yeah, kind of. And then like nothing happened. So this has been going on for like almost 2 years at this point, to be explicitly clear. Like, and I'm surprised like now it's like round trip to the point where like it's a topic of discussion. I think that's a meaningful like problem. Also, not just from the pool construction standpoint. I mean, you have Foundry, which is like a third of hash rate. You have Antpool, which is half the hash rate. That's 7/8. That's 80%, whatever, 88% of the hash rate just between those two players. They have this long tail of everyone else. FPPS, just as an economic model, very compressed. That's when miners get guaranteed a certain amount they get paid rather than taking the volatility of everything. As a capital market, I think is ripe for innovation because that's the reason why they have such aggregation hash rate, because people just want to have reliable payments. And essentially, you're just the casino, right? I'm running the roulette wheel. I take a 1% edge to myself, but I guarantee your payments. It's basically what you're doing. Is you're removing the variability. The miners get paid what they want. That, to me, sounds like just a general area of capital disruption. If someone has a balance sheet and the risk appetite to go tackle that and distribute hash rate, I think it's a massive problem. Additionally, geographic distribution. I'm a proud American. I also think that like a lot of hash rate being concentrated in the U.S. Around government utility contracts, like, is a problem area. I don't think it's as big as the block construction stuff, to be clear, but like that is a thing to be mindful of. Overall, like those are probably the biggest things. I think malaise in Bitcoin culture is not a centralization risk, but I think it's a risk just to Bitcoin. Just this morning, 10 severe vulnerabilities from Bitcoin version 22 and earlier were dropped. They're finally getting to like, here are bugs that we found that would actually brick the network if people started messing with them. And I think this goes back to the malaise. A lot of people just think Bitcoin's inevitable. And they don't realize that like it's a precarious situation. Like it's really important code. Being on top of that stuff's important. With the rest of your question, it was just like threats and risks to Bitcoin around centralization.
Yeah, I think those are the
big ones. They come to mind. The mining stuff more so than anything else. I don't view custodians as a centralization risk as far as Bitcoin, the health of the network is concerned right now.
Yeah,
if you have contentious forks, that now when you think about game theory of activation and like forks, those ETFs all have rights to pick whatever fork they want to honor as the real Bitcoin. So you basically have a dislocation between economic actors and the actual people who bought the asset. Like if I'm an ETF buyer, it's sitting at Coinbase custody, but then I have an ETF manager between me and them. You can get some wonky game theory on chain splits around that stuff, which I think is an area of concern, but it doesn't kill Bitcoin, but it could be used to kind of economically throw weight around. Those are like the big things I think of.
I think that proof of work is a big advantage with that.
Massive. Massively.
And also, I like, people are very like concerned about miners and stuff. Like, I think these guys are just like maverick, like savages that'll plug in anywhere. And generally, I think that I think Bitcoin is resilient to an ETF fork. I think that Chinese miners just like plug into the back of factories that, they bribe some CCP official or whatever, like to just let them stick some like that. I think it's like the purest iteration of like free market capitalism we still have. It's like really, I do think it's pretty much resilient to like most of these like sort of vectors of centralization, at least insofar as like, the ETF stuff doesn't really concern me. Or like even like people will cite Michael Saylor. I'm like, dude, he owns so much of the supply. And it's like Michael Saylor has like no power to like rip like PRs into Bitcoin Core. Like, come on, he has
like a soft social power, but it's not from the network level. And I don't think the ETF is like an imminent grave risk. Me just like threat modeling and thinking about how things can go wrong. Those are the areas, mostly the pool, like in minor centralization, but like in general, those are the things I start thinking about around like, what are pressure areas I probably think Bitcoin's going to get hit on over the next decade of like things that can happen.
Yeah, actually, you did mention one other thing though that you brought up, so I wanted to ask about. You said like there was all these like bugs from version 22 or earlier. I saw that tweet this morning as well. Like, how do you feel about one thing that like it kind of makes me, I don't know, a little bit sad almost, is that I think from what I hear, it's hard to get like really elite developers to work on Bitcoin, right? Like, and what do you think about like funding? I mean, it's no secret as to why like developers go to Ethereum and go to Solana and go to Avalanche or whatever. Like we need to be first and foremost like honest about that. And I think that a little bit, I often feel a little bit like sorry for, I don't know how to say sorry, but like there is a reason that there are 10 times as many developers elsewhere. Like, let's take a step back, right? Like, there is a token industrial complex that will make all of these developers like worth a lot more money than if they did this on Bitcoin. Generally with the social culture of Bitcoin, right? Which is much more like protocol and open source and like an aversion to tokens. Like, so I do like when people say like, oh, the development activity has gone elsewhere, right? Like this is a big thing that Udi and Eric would say. I was like, yeah, but like also like, let's be honest as to why that's the case, right? Like, I agree with you, but still like, what do you think in general? Like, we need like the Jack Dorseys of the world. And I know he is, like, for what it's worth, but we
Totally.
need these people to like get people working on Bitcoin that really believe in the mission. And I am like, I've talked to a few people, like, once again, I won't disclose who I've talked to, but there's somebody who I've talked to who's like, there are like 10 people in the world right now who are capable of maintaining Bitcoin Core. Like, he's like, Peter Willey and like, you know, like these contributors, like, these are the only people that can do this. Like, we don't have that many people that really understand this at like the most fundamental level.
Is it better if I say that maybe the number's not 10, maybe it's like 24? You know what I mean? Like,
it's a little better, yeah.
But like, I'm agreeing with like the broad swath of that. I think empirically, it's just very obvious you can get paid a big fat bag of money if you go off and go work on a random token project and you get token warrants, right? Like that's just very obviously on its face, and that's where a lot of cryptographers in the world go to because that's where the money is. Bitcoin, I mean, you have Brinks, you have OpenSats, you have a little bit of Chain Code Labs, you have
Blockstream, I guess, a little bit.
Human Rights Foundation, Blockstream, like you know, there's some activity going around there. It's definitely gotten a lot better over the past 2 years. Like OpenSats, like, has gotten a bunch of money from Jack, and now I chatted with them. I think they were getting other big donors that are coming in now, which is awesome. Brinks does a lot of great work, and you know, HRF like works on privacy stuff. At that core protocol level, though, there is a small crew of people, and the thing is that like Bitcoin's a very unique software project, and you can't just kind of be a C++ programmer or walk off the street and walk into a Bitcoin pull request and be able to meaningfully contribute, because there's second, third order consequences, and also just the nature of how blockchains work is like, in Bitcoin specifically, being backwards compatible, where you're like, you can't just arbitrarily like make changes. Like Satoshi made an off by one bug in like how some scripts execute, and that's just around today, because to change it would be to steal money from people who are using the way Satoshi.
Yeah,
coded, right?
yeah. I remember,
like, there's a bunch of tech debt, and you can't really get around a lot of it. And I think just like there's been interesting progress over the past year. I think it's BIP 352. Is it BIP 352? Sorry, basically a peer-to-peer encryption. 352 is silent payments, which is cool from Josie. But that's I'm blanking on the number, but it doesn't matter. Like doing like better peer-to-peer encryption to kind of like obfuscate data, because like there's like two lenses of this. There's like Bitcoin, the network like not breaking over a bug, and there's also like Bitcoin increasing its resilience and like ability to operate in hostile environments. Bitcoin's had a very welcoming environment over the course of its life. No one's like the U.S. government hasn't actively tried to ban it. You haven't had like big serious crackdowns in the West. And like there may be a place like in a world where like maybe Bitcoin has to get adversarial. And you also want engineers that are competent enough, one, so they can't just round up the 10 engineers and lock them in a room. And two, you want to be able to make sure that like if the devs are off the wheels for a bit, can like the network naturally propagate nodes and talk to each other in ways that don't just get shut down by ISP saying, oh, that's a Bitcoin block, reject. Like, you know, there's a lot of trust right now in the overall trustlessness of Bitcoin that like, you know, that's getting improved on continually. But yeah, those are the things I think about. It's definitely hard. I think it's definitely gotten better over the past couple of years, though, for sure.
Yeah,
like,
and there's a lot of people. I think a lot of people don't realize how much like maintenance, like Mac Rollo working on this, like the relay system, like Peter Willey working on, like I think he was he working on some of the peer-to-peer encryption stuff. I forget, like
some of it, yes.
Yeah, but like you don't hear about this stuff, right? That's what's interesting. Like the this isn't what, you know, grabs headlines, I guess. And so it is interesting, like these little things that are sort of just, you know, maintenance and like small upgrades to make this thing work. And it's like not a ton of people working on this on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, that was BIP 324, peer-to-peer encrypted transport protocol. So basically, like everything has been operating on like mostly plain text if you weren't using Tor and Bitcoin. So if you were a hostile government, you could be like, oh, you're relaying a Bitcoin transaction. I'm just going to like not let that happen anymore. Right.
Yeah.
Very, very basic things that you would think like in this, like Bitcoin's hard money, like no one can stop it. Like, oh yeah, we should add end-to-end encryption. That makes a lot of sense. You know what I mean? Like that stuff is still just kind of hanging out. I'm overall optimistic. The trend's going in the right direction now, to be clear. But it's definitely something I think just overall, like even if you want them to be like monks that just maintain the code base and don't like make an upgrade, you need an elite level of developers that have done the years of onboarding to get in there. It's like a Jedi apprenticeship. Like you don't just walk in and just like start like doing pull requests to Bitcoin. Unless you're like reared in code. That was hilarious because he had made a consensus change and I was like, who the hell's this guy? Turns out he'd been working at BitGo for years and like did all their Bitcoin architecture, right? But usually you need to like earn your chops to like start meaningfully contribute and help at Bitcoin Core. Which is the way I guess it should be because it's sensitive information. It's sensitive protocol. You don't want to just be willy-nilly making changes.
Yeah. Well, we went a full 2 hours. I think we really crushed it.
Wow.
Thank you. Yeah.
Amazing.
Thank you for coming on. I thought it was awesome.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's fun to see you're as beautiful as your profile picture. And, it's great to be on the Gwart Show. Always good I love these like cross like cultural pollination chats about like Bitcoin and crypto and like the ecosystem and everything. I learned a lot here. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was awesome having you on. I appreciate it.
Great. Take care.